Hi to everyone watching. Welcome to this session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Lavanya Singh, and today I am delighted to be representing Girl Up and having a discussion about tech and tech careers with Emily Craven, CEO of Story City. Talking Tech is a series celebrating girls and women in tech being recorded around the world between Girls in ICT Day in 2020 and 2021. Girls in ICT Day celebrates women in information and communications technologies and empowers girls to pursue careers in ICT. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and it's in support of Equals, the global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. Girl Up is excited to be a partner on this session today. The goals of the series include inspiring young women about ICT careers and offering diverse examples of how ICT is supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to get started by introducing myself and Girl Up. My name is Lavanya, and I'm a junior at Harvard studying computer science and philosophy. I'm here on behalf of Girl Up, a global campaign dedicated to uniting girls around the world. I got involved with Girl Up in 2014 when I founded a Girl Up club at my high school. The organization's emphasis on grassroots organizing, led by young women, really resonated with me, and I was fortunate enough to be a member of and eventually co-chair of Girl Up's Teen Advisory Board. Girl Up has done some incredible work reducing the gender gap in STEM, and I was a part of their Y-Size STEAM Camp, an exciting initiative to bring together girls from around the world to learn about science and technology from leading professionals and academics. I'm super excited to ask Emily about her work with ICT and hear her story. So with that, let's just jump into it. It's very nice to meet you, Emily. Can you maybe start by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Lavanya. I really appreciate it. I am Emily Craven. I run a startup called Story City, which I'm sure we'll speak a little bit more about. But I've had a really weird and varied career. So when I was a young teenager in high school, which was a lot longer than it should from today, I was very, very good at maths and science, but I was also incredibly creative as well. So at the same time, while I was taking things like mathematics and physics and chemistry, I was also writing my first book, which was a fantasy novel. And I had been inspired by my favorite author to start writing that when I think I was about 12. And so I always had kind of this war with myself between my creative side and then my fairly competitive scientific side. And that has kind of led me to doing not only different careers within science, but also different careers within publishing and creation, and has then led to a weird hybrid of the two with Story City.
Yeah, do you want to tell us about Story City?
Yeah, so Story City is I like to say we turn streets into adventures. So we are a platform for location-based storytelling, where the idea is that you can only unlock a story if you are standing in the right location and you follow that through the city that you're exploring. And so whether it is a real life choose your own adventure, whether it is a puzzle trail or a historic walking tour, the idea is that all of these experiences are created by local content creators who know their cities best. And so we are essentially, as of March, opening our platform up so that anybody can create and sell in this space to be able to make their cities more vibrant, to be able to tell their stories, and to be able to create stories that you can live and step into.
Cool, yeah. So you mentioned when you were introducing yourself that you've worn a lot of different hats. You know, you've pursued careers from astrophysics to being an entrepreneur, an author, a mentor, a speaker, and these all seem different at first. But can you maybe tell us a little bit about how these roles interact and if you have a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, so like I would argue that they're not different, because sometimes the things that inspire us are some things that are not necessarily real. So the reason how I ended up in astrophysics was because I was a very great lover of Star Trek. So my mum was a Trekkie, she indoctrinated the rest of us. And so that was something that I used to watch a lot when I was a teenager. I used to read a lot of science fiction books and those kind of things. And so that's how I ended up going into astrophysics. And it was something that I was very, very good at, but it was also something that I realized very quickly that I didn't like doing. So I had actually been selected to be part of a prestigious program where they would send students who were doing astrophysics over to Chile to work on a telescope there in the Chilean Andes. And so I was in Chile for several months back in university. And it was while I was there that I kind of realized that astrophysics was one of those things that was knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and that wasn't what I was interested in. I wanted to be able to make an impact on the world that I saw. I wanted to be able to connect with people, not just computers. And so I didn't really know what to do. And I was very good at geology at the time, so I ended up falling into geophysics, and I worked in mining for several years. So I was kind of the person who was like, I think you should put a hole there looks like a really likely spot. Spend several hundreds of thousands of dollars dropping a hole there. Let's see what we find. And again, it was one of those things where it was something that in reality, well, I really enjoyed studying in university, where you would go on hikes and you would map and you would take samples and you would draw up what you thought this area was like. In reality, when you went to go into the real world of it, it was something that just didn't grab me in the same way that I had hoped a career would. And it was only after a very long number of years that I kind of realized that what I had really loved and enjoyed about Star Trek wasn't necessarily the science, but it was the adventure of it. It was the adventure, it was the storytelling, and it was the people, and it was the characters. And what I love is that, like, that kind of fiction and that kind of fantasy can inspire you not only into a complete career path, but it can also inspire you into wanting a better world, connecting with other people, building sympathy and empathy, like all of those things that kind of make us a well-rounded human beyond what we do for a career and what we do for a living. And so I'm really honestly very grateful for the years in university where I got my degree in astrophysics and I got my degree in geophysics and ended up working in the mining industry, because they taught me how to think, right? And so I think that some of the most important things, particularly for women to realize, is that yes, though you may be good at something, that doesn't mean that you are obliged to do it as a career, but also that you can take the things, like nothing's ever wasted. You can take the things that you've learned and you can build new stories for yourselves, and you can help other people build new stories for themselves. And so from there, I kind of went into publishing, and I had a very interesting career in publishing, because a lot of people in publishing would write their books, they would submit them to traditional publishers, they would get those published, they would do well or not well, and then that would kind of determine whether or not they had a career, right? But that was not something that I did. With my path through publishing, I actually ended up being involved in, they call it like the ebook revolution, when ebooks became a thing, right? And people could start building their own careers in creativity and in storytelling. And so I learned all of the technology around building ebooks and building your own novels, and how do you do all of that production and those kind of things, because technology was something that I had done all throughout high school and all throughout university. It was something that made sense to me, and it's honestly very simple technology, but it still scares and trips up a lot of people, right? And it was one of those things that it was wonderful to see how people could build entire careers independently, and they didn't need to go through those traditional channels to do that. And so I was then brought on board at the Institute for the Future of the Book, which is a program that was run out of the Queensland Writers Centre at the time. And we did a whole bunch of publishing experiments. We experimented with how people built to stories, how people added and made stories. We did live writing performances. We did poetry remixes. We did visual-based things. We did you know, stuff like what I started to do with Story City, which was like those locative, choose your own adventures. And so we experimented a lot with what it meant to tell stories, with what it meant to use technology to do those kind of things, right? And that eventually ended up culminating me into me building Story City, because Story City was something where I had seen that revolution of independent publishing, and I had wanted to give emerging authors in their cities a chance to build that career and a chance to build that storytelling muscle, and not have to move to bigger cities to be able to do that, because that's how creativity has been. Like, if you're in movies, you move to LA. If you're in publishing, you go to London or New York or Sydney, right? And it kind of has made this world where cities were dying culturally, right? And they were struggling for vibrancy, and particularly small businesses and those kind of things. And I think that if there was ever a silver lining to the pandemic, it's the fact that people have realized that things are possible remotely. If you want to have that big high flying career, it does not have to be in the, you know, New Yorks of the world, and that we can actually pick the places that we want to live. And you can get a very, very, very talented person who used to live in San Francisco but now lives in Colorado because they love to ski, and like, that's possible, right? And so all of the science and the scientific work that I did, even though I was really good at it and I didn't like it, it taught me to think, and it then informed how I create and then how I make my impact on the world. Because I think that stories are one of those things that, particularly when you get a diversity of voices and you get a diversity of stories, that they are one of the best ways to battle things like this political bipolarism that we have. They are one of the best ways to solve for people disconnecting and not empathizing with people. And if we can use the technology that we have become reliant and addicted to be able to bring that humanity back into things, the social impact of that is huge. And I feel like I'm making much more of a difference than I did when I was telling you that a dwarf galaxy 100 million miles away was made out of hydrogen, right?
Yeah. Wow, that's incredibly inspiring. And yeah, there are so many different goals that almost seem like they aren't connected, but hearing you talk about the work that Story City does makes me see that these goals like are connected, you know, restoring vibrancy to cities, telling stories, giving publishers a platform, like all of these things can happen at once. And that's super
Yeah,
inspiring.
and technology is one of those things that, like, has made that possible, because, like, a lot of people within those industries see it as a disruption. Like, the publishing industry is like, oh, ebooks like killed our industry, they're the reason why people can't have careers anymore. And it's not. The reason why people didn't really have careers in the first place is because it was a heavily gatekeepered industry, where they thought that they knew every trend and every story that anyone would ever want. And a whole bunch of people, particularly people of color's voices, got locked out, right? And then it ends up being this very homogeneous, same style stories that come out year after year. And so they kind of bemoan the fact that these days it's so much harder to get published, and it's all about marketing. And you know, I think that in a lot of industries, it's been all about marketing. Even in science, you are like marketing yourself to get that next grant. You're marketing yourself to get that paper published. Like, marketing is this thing that permeates every part of life. But you know, they're seen as disruptive, and they're seen as like destroying industries. But at the same time, like, technology is giving people a way to do things on their own terms that doesn't put them in some sort of industrial product line that they can't get out of for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, it might be changing the industry, but it doesn't mean that we don't have access to stories. In fact, it's democratizing that access, as you've said. I would also love to ask you about, so you mentioned that you kind of transitioned from your, you know, career in geology to doing what you were really passionate about. So I'd love to ask about that moment and what that was like, as a junior in college, thinking about, my future plans, just thinking about career flexibility and how you make that jump into what you really care about, I would really benefit from hearing about that.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I think that I looked at my happiness level, and I looked kind of like down the barrel of like what the coming years were going to be like. And I think that I realized that I think it was one of those things where I realized that there is a difference between something being hard but worth it, and something being hard and not worth it. And so like I had to ask myself, like, what is it just because this career is hard or different from what I was expecting? Is there things that I found joy in doing? Like was there like ways that I could inject that joy into things? And when I kind of looked really closely, I was like, it's hard, but at the same time, it wasn't bringing me joy at all. I wasn't interested in the things that I was doing at work. I wasn't kind of, and though like my boss was very like happy to kind of push for me to like do papers and do research and like, expand professionally, I always see the fact that if I don't want to grow more in an area, that's a red flag to me, right? Because I'm someone who's always voraciously learned. I love to constantly learn and experiment and try new things. And if I've gotten to the point where I don't care enough to expand myself, whether that be professionally or personally or whatever, that's when I kind of knew I was in the wrong place, right? And don't get me wrong, I kind of had to build up a safety net. Like I saved a bunch of money up so that like I wouldn't feel so terrified about cutting that tie. And I was also waiting for my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, to finish up his university. And so when he finished his university, we kind of used that as an excuse to kind of switch states, but then also to like cut the career and see what I could build up. And in like the last 2 years that I was in geology, I was actually on the side building up a blog around ebooks and around digital experiments, right? So I was starting to learn all of the things that went into it. I was starting to write my own books and publish them. I was starting to get people reaching out to me, asking me to write a blog for this particular website, which I would get paid for, and then write one for another one, which I would get paid for. And so like I kind of ran those two careers concurrently. And when I felt I had established myself enough that I felt comfortable quitting, I did. Right? Because I've also had that point in my life where when I was working for the Queensland Writer Centre, it was a non-profit and it was contract work. And at the end of every year, depending on how much funding they had for the next year, you could very well not have a job the next year, right? And so I worked for the Queensland Writer Centre for 2 years before that ended up happening to me. And then that job got like cut off quickly. And so I've been in a scenario where I've been able to prepare for it for a couple of years, and another one where it ended in a couple of months, right? And it's always scary, and that never goes away. And it always feels very chaotic in those first like 6 months of making that change, because you're trying to establish yourself in a new position and find allies and find new footing from which you can build something from. But it's always, I found that every time like I've made that switch, it's always turned out to have a bunch of opportunities open for you when you free your time up. When your time is still full with that job or that course that you don't like or whichever, you don't have that ability to step back and look for those opportunities, and then people don't know that you're looking, right? And so there's something that switches when you actually make that decision to quit, and make that pivot into something that matches better with the impact that you want to make in the world and the way that you want to grow. And so Even though it will never not be scary, it is fine to take it a little slow like I did the first time, or to like just jump all in, like what ended up happening the second time, right? It's different for everybody, but it's about asking like, what do you want to do, and how do you want to grow, and how do you want to make that impact on the world? And I generally kind of let those guide me when I'm feeling stuck.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. It's good to hear about the different approaches to making that kind of pivot. You see a
And
movie.
I won't pretend that people in your life won't make it harder for you either. Like, so in that first one, I had so many people tell me that I was too smart for art, is what they told me, right? Like, you're too smart for art, and people feel like, things in kind of like those, like if they are very, book smart, science smart, whatever, that like that loving and doing other things means that they're giving up on their potential. But like, I have now used it to funnel it into being the CEO of like a tech company, right? And what I am doing is incredibly creative, and I deal with everyone from like filmmakers to writers to musicians to nonprofits to like so many different types of people and different types of creators, and in a much more collaborative environment than I would have as a solo writer. And this will probably be the career that like makes me, right? And I'm using my smarts for that, right? And there are different kinds of smarts, and so just remember that like the people in your life are very well meaning, and they just want to make sure that you're safe and secure, and you have, funds behind you for retirement, and like all of those kind of things. But only you are the person who knows what's going to make your life fulfilling. So,
Yeah. Well, speaking of people and community, you've done a lot of work with supporting female entrepreneurs and with mentorship and building community. So can you maybe talk about that, and also talk about how community and mentorship has shaped your own career and your own experiences?
yeah, I have been mentored by so many wonderful people, and I have learned so much more from those mentorships than I ever have from a university or a course, right? And so, like, I have had wonderful mentors from like the author that I mentioned, who like inspired me to start writing when I was like 12. Many years later, like a decade later, she ended up being a writing mentor for me, and so we did a 12-month mentorship together, and I learned so many things from her that I could have never ever learned from a university degree, right? And I've had many different types of writing mentors, like business mentors, and the thing that I have found is that I'm probably one of those people who learns best by example, and from asking other people how they got through it and how they have seen it, and then adapt that to kind of my own personality and observations. But with mentorship, the amounts of strides that you can make in your skill level, and in the profession that you want to go into, it's like getting a hyper compressed crash course. And I love that. I love how so many people have like not wanted any money and have lent down and kind of just helped bring me up, right? Just because they want to see someone new in the world, because they see the enthusiasm and they want that passion to kind of to be there, and continue to unfold across the world. And that's the way that I see it as well. So it's very important to me that that we give people who are emerging that support and that mentorship and that guidance and permission to make mistakes, to learn how to build boundaries, to learn what they want and how they want to get there, because so many things these days reward the people who are already there and already successful. So if you've already won a couple of awards, you're much more likely to win more awards. If you've already been given a grant, you're much likely to be given more grants. If you're have had like one or two things published, then you're much likely to get like more things published, because when you put in your submissions, you're like, I've been published in this place and I've been published in that place. And it kind of, right, it kind of goes on. Whereas like, to break into that as an emerging person can be incredibly difficult, particularly in incredibly gatekeepered industries like academia or your publishings or even like film and television, which is one of the most gatekeepered industries of all. And so if I can be a mentor to people to help them not only be confident that they are making the right decisions, and if they don't make the right decisions and something goes wrong, that's fine, right? Like that you have to trust in that ability and know that you are making the right decision at the right time with the information that you have, right? And so that's why it's important to me, because I want people who are resilient, because when you're resilient and you fail and you get up again and you fail and you get up again, those are the people who make things happen. And so for mentorships, I see that as a way to transfer information quickly and to personalize that to that person what they need. But then it's also a way to give people a leg up when many industries say, no, you have to go through the same pain that we did to get to where we are, right? Which is stupid. Like, things should be getting easier as you get up there, not like paying the pain back. And so that's why I'm a real big advocate for mentorship, why I like to do mentorship, and why particularly with Story City, the way that we kind of built ourselves is that we built out a range of resources and training and workshops so that anybody can get the experience that they need to build something like this, whether you're established, whether you're emerging, like it doesn't matter. Because I think it's very important that we kind of reach back and give people that hand up, because it's only when we work together that we can really make things that are interesting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, so speaking of mentorship and supporting folks in pursuing careers that are traditionally have been subject to gatekeeping, I'd love to also hear about any advice that you have for young women who are interested in building and shaping their own career the way you have. You know, it's in some senses you've strayed off the beaten path and you've really done your own thing and found your own place in the world. And I personally find that inspiring, and I'm sure so many folks watching find that inspiring. So I'd love to hear about more advice you have on doing that, and just what skills and what kind of mindset is essential for doing that kind of work.
To me, it's about like I say like read widely, but like watch widely, or like dive into things that have nothing to do with the industry that you're in. Because when you're looking at forging your own career path, particularly in a way that is outside the normal, the way that you do that is by cherry picking things from different places, right? And so that's why they tell authors to read as many genres as possible, because if you just read fantasy, then the things that you make follow a very narrow window. But if you read fantasy and thriller and crime and science fiction and contemporary, and you mix it all up, you can take brilliant elements from each one, and then those are the things that get interwoven into those big books that become blockbusters, right? And so like that's a very simple example, but it's the same thing with life and building a career path, right? So like in terms of like science, like I will listen to, I have like an incredibly eclectic mix of podcasts that I listen to. I listen to everything from like Freakonomics to like TED Radio Hour to audio dramas to true crime podcasts to No Such Thing as a Fish, where they're telling you weird facts about the world, right? Because I find that if I read a bunch of those, if I read nonfiction books as well as business books, as well as kids books, as well as like romance books or whatever, right? Like the more that I am looking around at different things and looking around at different industries, like particularly when you're in the tech industry, you see, you know, the social medias of the world, and then you'll see like the Slacks of the world, and you'll see the Airbnbs and like all of these different industries, and they all use different models, and they have all grown in different ways, and they all have a little bit of something to teach you, right? And so like anything that allows you to hear about the career paths and stories that other people, of how people have built particularly new things, are really helpful, but also making sure that you have a wide source of places that you go to learn, and that like you still learn weird things about science, and you learn a little bit of a weird thing about business, and you learn a little bit of a weird thing about consulting, and like, you know, like you try each of those kind of individual things out, because that's what will allow you to look at an industry from an angle that nobody else has looked at it before, and be like, why hasn't anyone tried this before, right? Because there's always some way around how people have done it before, or some way around a no, which you can turn into a yes, right? And if you kind of look at how different people have achieved things, but then also how different businesses have evolved, and markets have evolved, and industries have evolved, and like delving into the history behind those sorts of things can spark a bunch of ideas that allow you to build a career that is interesting for you, but also makes you unique.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's useful advice. I guess something else I'd like to ask about. So you've sampled a lot of different fields and have, achieved greatly in different sectors. But a lot of your work has been in traditionally male-dominated fields, whether that is like astrophysics or geology, or, being the leader, the CEO of a tech company. And so I'd like to ask how, your identity as a woman, and particularly how these communities you build of female entrepreneurs and mentors, how does that shape into your work, into your mindset, into your everyday life, into how you're positioned within these environments?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely things that you notice, right? Like you notice that it's easier for men to like raise money than women. You notice that if you're in a group of people in a room and there's a male entrepreneur and a female entrepreneur, people will just automatically ask more questions of the male entrepreneur, or the male entrepreneur will talk slightly longer than the female one will feel comfortable for. I have dealt with things in different ways over the years, and I can't remember how this became a mantra. But there have been times in my life where I've been like, think like a man, where I'm like, do I know how to do it now? No. Do I think I could figure it out? Yes. Then tell them yes. Right. And so like, that's kind of like how I've done it, is that these days I now think, do I think I could figure it out? Like, even if I don't know what I'm doing right now, do I think I could figure this out? And if the answer is yes, then I'll do it, regardless of whether or not I'm qualified for that. It's one of those things where like I haven't had formal training for like the two things that I'm currently doing, which is running a business and then the writing side of things. They don't have formal degrees in either of them. But it came from that mindset of like, do I know what I'm doing now? No. Do I think I could figure it out? Yes. And then I will go ahead and I will make plans to do that, right? And it's not necessarily about diving all the way in. It's you make goals and you set yourself steps and you figure out what don't you know, and then how do you go and find those things out, and who should you talk to about finding those things out, right? Like, so you kind of have to be systematic in how you collect that knowledge and how you do that. But I've found that I've never really let anybody down that way. When someone asks, can you do this thing? And even if I don't know how to do it right then and I say yes, it's always worked out, right? Because I have done that learning that then is needed to do that, and then that has given me a bunch of opportunities. And I think that that's what a lot of women struggle with, is being like, well, I don't exactly know how to do this thing right this minute, therefore I should say no until I do know how to do this thing. And it's not necessary. Part of taking something on board is the learning of it. And that's what I tell anyone who we have as a new hire at Story City, is that like part of it is the learning, and you don't have to know everything. And I would rather hire you on passion and good ideas than necessarily on having a background in X, Y, and Z. I think that particularly in very male dominated industries, it's about having that willingness to say yes, even though you don't know to right now, but then also they're just human beings, right? And if people try to talk over me, I just continue to speak, right? I kind of trained myself to do that. And I think that it's not necessarily fair, like to have to have that, you know, macho personality and all of those kind of things. But I think that the more that you kind of establish yourself, and the more that people get to know you, and the more women who can kind of push their way through that discomfort to build those new careers and those new paths, that it will get easier. And then like as you have more women in these kind of positions, like I tell my team all the time that I don't expect them to work themselves into the bone and burn out like traditional startup culture, because I see that as a stupid way to run a truly creative business, right? And so we can start like, if you create your own thing, you can set the culture that you want to see. And so that's why I will always advocate creating your own thing over joining somebody else's thing, because then you can bring the femininity, and you can bring different ways of doing things into those traditionally male dominated areas, and do very successful things that I feel like men at this point in time maybe couldn't do until they had come to that realization themselves.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That resonates a lot with my own experiences as well. We are way over on time, but I'd love to ask you one final question, which is just about the future. Looking forward, what are you excited about for yourself, for Story City, for your other ventures?
I am really excited about the impact that this type of storytelling can make on the world, where I think that one of the really key ways of building empathy is to actually have someone literally step into the shoes of someone else. And so far, things like augmented reality and VR have been really inaccessible to storytellers, because they require this knowledge that you need to understand how to code, and that really high production values to be able to create things for this space. And so what I'm hoping with Story City is that, like, being an open platform, not requiring any code at all for you to be able to create these experiences, I'm really excited to see how we can allow underrepresented voices and communities to be able to tell stories that give you an insight into who they are from their perspective, rather than the perspective of the global narrative, right? I'm really excited for how this storytelling will hopefully be able to use location and use that kind of like attachment that we have to location to bridge cultural divides between us, right? And that's what I'm most excited about, is how technology can bridge those cultural and political and racial divides, and allow more people to tell stories that can connect us to each other. Because I think that while technology has done some wonderful things, technology has, as an overall thing, kind of disconnected us from the world. And if we can reconnect people using technology, I wonder how many strides we can make, whether it's something to do with climate change or equality or no poverty or all of those other SDGs that the UN are really striving to push. I feel like by using story to bridge those, that we can make them a reality a lot sooner than not. And so I'm really excited to see how people use this kind of technology to bring people together. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, your work with Story City and with augmented reality is a great way to shift perspective. And I'm also excited for all of the good that it's going to bring in the world.
I did want to ask, before we ended our talk, I do want to know, how did you end up in the field that you are currently studying? How did you end up where you are? And how do you feel about where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So I study computer science and philosophy. And I initially chose this combination kind of separately. So I really liked computer science. I liked writing code. And I liked the feeling of like when you run your code and it works, it's very exciting. It's an excitement that's hard to find for me in other places. And at the same time, I was also reading philosophy. I did debate in high school, so I read philosophy because of that, and I really enjoyed it. I left debate after a while, got tired of that, but I continued reading philosophy. And I found like a very similar excitement there because, when you're reading a philosophy text, it's kind of like a puzzle you're trying to solve. It's a very active reading process. You're kind of engaging in dialogue with the author. The author is arguing with you in a sense. And so I found like a very similar excitement there. And so I came into college and I was like, okay, like these two things are separate. I love them both, so I'm going to study them. But then I grew up in Silicon Valley, and so I've been like thinking about the tech industry for a while. And getting to college, I started to see this movement to make technology more intersectional and more interdisciplinary. And I started to explore the intersection of computer science with other fields, and particularly with philosophy. And I found this like really diverse connection between the two, and this really rich history of connection in a couple of ways, right? So like a lot of the like early like founding like figures in computer science were philosophers because like it started with logic, it started with math. So I think that's a really interesting connection, and I'm currently doing research that's like in that logic, philosophy, computer science area. And then of course, like I think the other big application is like ethics applied to technology. I'm trying to understand how technology and the digital revolution is going to change our conception of the self, going to change our conception of community, our conception of friendship, our conception of ethics, but also trying to understand like what ethics can teach us about how we do and should create technology. And so I think over the course of my college career, I've been exploring these intersections and exploring, different career paths that combine these fields. And I think I'm really excited about, the more I learn, the more I am very excited because I feel quite lucky to be in a place where I'm able to do the things that I'm good at and the things that I love, and I'm able to kind of do them at the same time, which I never thought I'd be able to do.
I love that. I love that, being able to take two things that seem really separate and being like, no, how do they go together? And I think that I know that, like, as you said, like Harvard does that a lot. I know that MIT does that a lot, particularly with their media labs. And so like, if you have a passion that is completely separate from ICT and from sciences, like it's not a waste of time to pursue that.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it never is.
They say that every issue is becoming a technology issue, and I think that's very true. I think whatever problem, whatever you're interested in, if it's not a technology issue now, it will soon become one. So I think it's very interesting to have that ICT perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. That wraps up our session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. But I had a great time talking to you, Emily, and I learned so much and was so inspired. And I'm sure that will ring true for a lot of the folks at home watching this. So yeah, I'm really grateful to you for taking the time to do this, and I really enjoyed getting to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was absolutely delightful, and I really can't wait to see what you do with the things that you're currently learning.